Big news in test prep world, big news in SAT land. If you are getting ready for the SAT, if you're a high school student, you may have heard the news. College Board made a big announcement just yesterday about these changes coming to the SAT. Now, you may remember just a few years ago, the SAT made some big changes, and in fact, over the last year, College Board announced dropping both the subject tests and the essay itself from the SAT. There is no more essay on the SAT. SAT. But their announcement yesterday was about how the SAT is going all digital. So what does that mean for you? Well, if you're a current high school student, if you're a sophomore, if you're a junior, if you're a senior, the announcement means almost nothing to you. None of these changes are taking place until at the earliest fall 2023. The fall 2023 PSAT is the first time that students in the United States are going to see some of these changes rolling out. So if you're currently a freshman, when you take the PSAT the fall of your junior year, these changes will matter to you. But if you're any older than that, probably none of this is going to matter. The changes are going to propagate out to the actual SAT in spring of 2024. So again, if you're a current sophomore, it is possible that come spring of 2024, you may be trying to get one last test in, and this would matter to you. But outside of that, really, current students don't have much to worry about. For future students, though, the changes that they're making are quite significant, particularly in how they're scoring the test. When they go to this all digital format, they're turning the test into something that's called computer adaptive. And depending on how a computer adaptive test is implemented, this is not necessarily great news for students. Now, fortunately, it seems like the way that they're going to implement this computer adaptive model is similar to the SAT's older brother, the GRE, in that it's going to be what's called computer adaptive by section. So here's what that means. The math section looks like it's going to take an hour overall, but it's going to be split up into two different modules. So you've got module number 1 here, and that's going to lead to some module number 2. You're going to have a set of questions. We don't know how many. They've said you're going to have more time per question. So let's just guess that it's about 20 questions for that first module. So you got question number 1, somewhere in the middle, question number 10. You finish up here with question number 20. These questions are going to have a range of possible difficulties. Early questions will be pretty easy questions. Most students who are juniors will have seen this in their classes. They'll be able to answer these without much difficulty at all. And then you're going to have some medium difficulty questions where either it's material that your typical junior will not necessarily have seen in the class, or that same material but just tested in a more difficult way. And then finally, you finish up with some genuinely difficult questions. So these are going to be questions where for sure you haven't necessarily seen the material unless you're in more advanced math classes, for example, or the material that they are testing maybe you've seen before, but they're testing it in a way that's very difficult. That makes students more likely to get these questions wrong. Within this module, you will likely be able to skip around. You'll be able to go forward, go backwards, skip questions that seem difficult to you, go back to those questions later and guess, but then you're going to lock in your answers to those 20 questions at some point, and how you do on that section is going to determine which section you get placed into for module 2. So module 2, you would have 3 possibilities. Depending again on how you do in that first module, you might get a bucket full of easy questions, a bucket full of more medium difficulty questions, or the hardest questions that the SAT writers can throw at you. You might be thinking at this point, well, why would I want to be in the hard bucket, right? Surely I would want to be in the bucket where the questions are as easy as they possibly can be. But you actually don't, because your score depends on which bucket you get sent into. If you're in this easy bucket, of course your minimum is going to be 200 because they said that they're keeping the scale the same, but your score might max out at somewhere around a 420. So even if you get literally every question right on that easy section, the most you can do, the best score you can get is just a 420. If you do a little bit better in module 1 and you get probably somewhere around half the questions right, give or take 2 or 3 questions, then you're going to get sent over to this medium bucket. And in this case, maybe your score ranges from something like a 400 if you miss literally every question, up to a 600 if you got literally every question right in that second module. So it's nice in that you have an absolute floor after you've done so well on module number 1, but then you also have a ceiling that you can't do better than, depending on how you did on that first module. In the sense of the score that you want, of course, best case scenario is you do really well in module 1 and they send you over to this harder bucket where the scores are going to be maybe something like 580 up to a perfect 800 if you do well enough, if you answer enough of those really difficult questions correctly. Again, this is the way the current GRE works, and the group that writes the GRE is the same group that writes the SAT, that is ETS. So in all likelihood, they're going to be following some of the practices they've learned over the years from the GRE. To be sure, there are some benefits both to the student and to the company, to College Board itself. College Board is going to be able to get you your scores a lot more quickly using this model because essentially they're pre-curving the test as they use these computer adaptive modules. So they don't have to wait as long to get the results and then decide what the curve is later. At the same time, there are some downsides. Although you can move around within a section and skip around and go back and answer questions later, once you've locked in that first module, you can't go back to it because, of course, the second module depends on that first module. And so you have to make sure you do as well as you possibly can on that first module. You can't go back and change anything later. That makes those first set of 20 questions or whatever it's going to end up being a little bit more high stakes. It increases the pressure just a little bit more. There are strategies to deal with that, and of course you'll want to practice once they announce some more details about what the sections will look like. I'm sure they'll put some work up on Khan Academy where students can get a feel for it before they have to do the real thing. And again, the bottom line is if you're a current sophomore, junior, or senior, you really don't need to worry about this. This is not going to affect the test that you take in the coming year and a half or so. Worry not, as always. Control the things you can control and don't worry about the rest. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below with those questions, and otherwise I will see y'all next time.